Welcome to the Garage Grit Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Hurlock of AA Shop Marketing. Our hope is to unite shop owners to tackle common stress points and challenges that they're experiencing within the auto repair shop space. Our mission is to guide you towards the best solutions for your shop. So tune in, join the conversation, and let's move your business forward. Welcome to the Garage Grit Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Hurlock of AA Shop Marketing. And we've got a very interesting topic, one that every single one of us can relate to today, specifically about how the manufacturer and the dealers have told their customers they can bring their cars in every 10,000 miles or 8,000 miles. And it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. And everyone who runs a shop knows that's not often enough, that other things might go wrong. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about how to, in my opinion, some of that trust that we have with our customers has been eroded by those claims that were made by the dealers. And so we need to overcome that, work that back in, and maybe without actually slamming the dealers, because maybe we explain it away or maybe we just come out and slam it. But those are the types of things we're going to talk about today, how to actually rebuild that trust, how to overcome that myth so that you don't have customers coming in massive needing of mass repairs. And we've got two different guests with us today, Jeremy and Mitch. Mitch has been returning to us from a previous episode. It was actually one of my favorite episodes, Mitch, by the way, I think it was back in July, talking about the transferring of ownership from one generation to the next. One of the things that I love about repair shops in this industry in general is it's, even when it isn't family, it is very family. But it is often family. I was speaking to someone earlier today, they're fifth generation. And I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. And so I love that. I feel like that's very American, and I love that too. Anyway, I was recently also asked why there's a flag in my background. And I've shared this story a couple of times before. I don't know that I've done it on this podcast. The flag came into the picture during COVID, and my son had to be basically homeschooled instead of going to school. He was in kindergarten at the time. And this is no slant or slight on the school district. They were trying to figure out what way was up. It was all thrust upon them. But I noticed that they weren't doing the Pledge of Allegiance. And I said, no. So before my son, who was sitting on the other side of this room, was doing the video classroom, he and I would stand up together. And so I went out and got that flag real quick, and we would pledge allegiance to the flag before his school started. That lasted for about a month before the school started to do it as well. They came around. But anyway, that's the backstory of that. Let's talk about the backstory because I feel like these manufacturers or the dealer's message of 10,000 mile intervals is newer. I feel like it's a newer thing. They haven't been talking about this forever. I don't recall 20 years ago being told that I could go that long. And it's a newer thing that I want to jump into. But before we do that, I want to introduce each of you. I'd like to actually do a round robin, allow you to tell your story, a little bit about how you got to where you're at, the name of your shop, the state that you're from. Tell us about the size of the population in the area. Is it rural? Is it urban? So Mitch, why don't you kick us off since you are the veteran here?
All right. I'm Mitch Fasnacht, going to be 50 in 2 weeks. So I'm a third generation owner in our family business. Currently, I have two sons working here. They anticipate on being fourth generation owners. It's really a 10-bay facility. I have 8 two-post lifts and an in-ground alignment machine. And then I have a flat bay that we're working towards bringing in the ADAS systems that we're working on. I don't know, like 6,700 square feet of shop space. My grandpa built this building in 59 for 65 years plus now. Our community that we're in we're in a little town in Lancaster, Pennsylvania called Denver. The town itself is maybe 4,000 people, but we're part of a greater community that probably is like 12 to 15,000 that are all in our local school district area. Lancaster County is probably, if not the fastest growing county in Pennsylvania, the second fastest growing county in Pennsylvania. We're really growing.
Thank you so much. All right, Jeremy, how about you take a turn? Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're at, the name of the shop, and those types of things, the size of the shop, and the population of the area. Go ahead.
My name is Jeremy Bucy. I own Allen Cox Automotive. We are in Marietta, Georgia, which is about 25 minutes north of Atlanta, depending on traffic. There's 8.5 million people in metro Atlanta area and over 1 million in the county that I'm in.
So more than Mitch.
Atlanta's huge. Atlanta's the East Coast LA. This business was started in 1983 by Alan Cox. It is the first independent Honda repair facility in the state of Georgia. Over the next 20, 30 years, they continued to grow and expand and servicing all Japanese, Korean brands. I started here in 2003. I came in as somewhat of a consultant. They were wanting to get into doing import performance cars, or at least reaching out to that market. I bought a little $400 Honda CRX that had a blown engine, and I converted the cylinder head over to a modern cylinder head, repinned the entire ECU harness to fit a modern ECU. 2 weeks later, the car cranked up, ran with no check engine lights, and they gave me a job a week later, cleaning the floors and the bathrooms.
Oh, congrats.
And a couple of weeks in, I went up to the parts manager and I go, when am I going to get paid to do what I'm here to do? And he goes, you are. You're here to clean the floor. So I continued to work over the next several years, learning the craft, becoming specialized in the Honda S2000 two-seat Roadster. Ended up, customer came to me, wanted me to build him a race car. So I built him a Honda S2000 race car to compete in 13-hour endurance races. And we did that for a couple of years. I got a phone call from Patrick Dempsey's race team, went and did Grand Am racing for a couple of years, and then had my first kid, got out of racing. Then I got back into racing, building a tire program for a team, went into doing Ferraris and Daytona prototypes and stuff like that, to the point that I was away from my business a little too much, and I've had to step back from racing. But nowadays, we apply what I've learned through racing and racing technology to resto mod of vintage cars.
Okay.
Did I miss anything?
No. Does any of what you learned from the racing world and dealing with endurance, maintenance and whatnot apply to any of the general repair shop side of things? Or is it just the vintage side that really dials in?
It's really more towards the vintage side. The only thing that applies to modern cars is suspension setup, alignment setup, corner weight and corner balancing of cars to help the people that like to do mountain driving and track driving.
Because I feel like that's another niche. You've got the vintage side. You've got potentially the people who actually are connected to the racing side. Do you still do business for people who are in the racing industry, or is that not really part of the business today?
Maybe 0.1%.
Tiny. Okay.
It's tiny. Because doing a corner balancing and suspension setup for a track day car is over $1,000. So you're not doing that for somebody that's on the street much.
Right.
And
even a teenager?
Yeah, we've shifted our focus over to maintaining our normal repair business and then growing our vintage car business.
Okay. And did you mention the size, or did I miss that? How many bays?
We are 10 bays, 3 flat stalls, 1 in-ground alignment rack in a 9,000 square foot shop.
Okay. All right, good. And I don't know that I asked you to share this, but I'm curious, how many people do you have there? How many employees?
I have 3 full-time techs, 2 service advisors, and me and my business partner, we're both former techs, so we count as alternate mechanics.
Okay.
Yeah, I know there's a big argument for don't work in the business, work on the business, but at the same time, I'm not carrying 1 to 2 additional techs that I can't give them 60 hours a week to. So having both of us available to absorb any of the swells in volume, and then when that volume dips down again, I'm not starving my 3 full-time techs.
That's interesting. We actually did a podcast about being on instead of in the business back in, I think it was either the April or March of 2024. We did that podcast. But it's interesting that you have some ideas around that. And had we had our Facebook group dialed in the way we're trying to move towards now, we're still moving towards it. But the plan for our Facebook group specifically is, if people like yourself want to chime in while people are talking about being on the business instead of in the business, you can say, here's a different alternate model. And you can actually have posted that inside that Facebook group, that private Facebook group for the repair shop owners. It's called the Garage Grit Facebook group. And so people can jump in and actually have this conversation or add the different pieces to the conversation on any of the podcasts, including that one. But if you don't mind, I'd love to hear because you have a different perspective on that. Can you go listen to that podcast and then get back to me at a later time as far as what your thoughts are on what was said during that podcast?
Sure.
I appreciate it.
At the end of the day, you have to determine what kind of life and what kind of business you want. There's always this big push in the aftermarket automotive repair industry to streamline everything, take in as many cars, build to $3-4 million a year. But you do tend to lose somewhat of your customer service when you try to push that hard for growth. And if you have really 2 or 3 different models of owners. You've got owners that have never been a mechanic. You have family generational transition owners, and then you have owners that used to be mechanics, which don't always make the best owners. They have a huge learning curve.
Go ahead, keep going.
But the owner that was a mechanic tends to take care of his mechanics better. You had a podcast a little bit ago about courtesy inspections. And one person, I think it was the lady that ran a shop out in California, says, we don't pay our techs for doing courtesy inspection. We try to push the full vehicle inspection. If I hand my mechanic a ticket that takes him 30, 40 minutes and I'm not paying him for it, I'm not going to have a mechanic. But you got to pay them for the time. That's what they're here for. Now, granted, it's only 2 or 3 tenths an hour, but it's something.
Yeah. Mitch, do you handle it somewhere? Even though Jeremy had different groups, right? He had the family generation, he had the mechanics the owners who were mechanics, and then you have people who weren't, who were just business people who came in, and you were an overlap of both. You were turning wrenches for a while, right, Mitch?
Yeah, I did for probably consistently 20 years, or plus years.
So how has that played into your ownership model? Do you pay your employees for courtesy inspections?
My guys are paid hourly currently. And so they get paid for everything on the clock. I have a tiered incentive program for hours turned. Pump them with bumps in the labor guides for other operations, certain operations that we've come together as a team. That might be more than Mitchell says or all data does. I've not had one guy complain about the way that we do it. I don't give them 0.2 or 0.3, but I also, like I said, I don't pay them flat rate. And the team that I have now, and I pay them hourly and I pay them well, it's probably the best team that I've ever worked with in my entire time that we've been here. And I think a lot of it is just when you talk about being the tech or the owner that was a tech or whatever it was, I did it. I know what it was like. And I think I do take good care of my people. I put air conditioning in the shop a couple of years ago. I built a brand new lunchroom for my guys a couple of years ago. It's got a full kitchen in it. I recently built a tech bathroom just for them so that they have privacy for their stuff. If they come to me with stuff and I feel that it's feasible or it's within my capability of doing it, I see it as an asset for my team, then we talk about it, and probably 90% of the stuff they bring to me, we check off the list and I take care of. I think that's why I have the best team that I have that we worked with.
I don't know. I think that you're putting a good point is, and for both of you, I think what I'm hearing is that you're taking good care of your team. And in many ways, because of that kind of transfers as they try to take care of the customers.
Yeah.
And so let's move into that conversation about building that trust relationship. Are the advisors, do you think the advisors feel just as important as the mechanics?
I believe so.
Because they're the ones that are communicating with the customer. And so I want to make them feel as special as they are, because without that relay of information, one of the stories that I like to share from my business partner and I in 2001, I had a customer call me and he was upset and I was confused because I knew that my business partner had just relayed good news. And my business partner is very technical in nature in the world of marketing, but he's not the best. And he's actually, 2 decades later, he's much better than he used to be, a lot. But in 2001, he could deliver good news and piss somebody off. And that was a special talent that he had, right? And so that's where I'm going with this. Whereas if I have to relay bad news, you've got to replace this, you've got to replace that. I can do it in a way to make them feel like it's important and that they're important. And that's a learned skill that our service advisors need to have, that the mechanics don't necessarily. right? So how important are we making them feel as part of the equation? Because I think, again, that if we make them feel important, then that feeling is transferred to making the customers feel important. Jeremy, you said yes. You think you're making your customer service advisors feel good.
Yeah, you always have little issues here and there. A lot of times it's communication, but communication can come down to how one person encodes the information and the other person decodes the information, and they may not be able to hear the same thing the same way. So we always struggle with that, but I give my service advisors a lot of control. So if they need to do something special to take care of a customer, they don't need to clear it by me. I just tell them to take care of it, because keeping that customer is more important than making an extra dollar.
Right.
Now, Mitch, do your service advisors use the customer's bathroom?
So both of those guys will go down and use the tech bathroom.
Okay.
I mean, they do. And I would say, like, my advisors are part of my team. I have two sons here. One of them is a tech, and his brain functions like a tech, and the other one is an advisor, and he thinks more numbers oriented. That was just how even growing up, you could see that coming through school. I had one that was not good in school, but he's a good technician. And I have another one that's a numbers kid, and he's like I don't want to say he's a junior advisor, but he's our youngest advisor, and he's starting to become my backup for office type stuff or other things. And they already had determined on their own, like, their skill set or their positions, when they said to me that they want to be able to take it over. They said, I can do this and I can do this. So we took that focus, and I've been working with the one in the shop, the tech. He gets more focus on technical training stuff than my advisor would. Specifically, I went out and got a foreman or a lead tech to bring in that he can work next to, because instead of sending to like automotive school or whatever it is, I want that guy working next to him. And then that's why I said, Jeremy, I pay my guys hourly. So my lead tech, maybe he doesn't get me a lot of hours this week for whatever reason, but he worked next to my son, who is ultimately my goal. And he's teaching him along the way, and he's doing very well. And I'm pleasantly surprised and pleased at the progress that we're making.
It sounds like you have a really good transitional plan for the future.
I'm turning 50 in 2 weeks. I'm not going anywhere. It was hard for me to take a step back, and I have to give them some responsibility and a little bit more say. I'm here. I listen to, when you were talking about handling your customers, I listen to the conversations all the time. My office door is open down there, and maybe I say to her afterwards, I don't know if I would have said it that. And then they'll say, how would you have said that? I'll say, I would have approached it this way. But it's all a learning curve. And that's how it is. I didn't know what to say the first day on the job or whatever it is, or either Jeremy. And so you learn. And some of it is you learn because you got your teeth kicked in because you said the wrong thing, and you got to move forward. I learn every day. I would say I'm still learning something every day. You know,
now I'm really kind of curious. Are you still driving customers home?
That's my big job. So I am the shuttle driver for the most part, or a parts picker upper if you can't get it in a timely fashion. And a lot of people know that I own the thing, but if I get a new customer, I love it because I'm shuttling them to work or back home or whatever. And they're like, oh, what do you do? Ultimately, and it'll come out and they're like, you're the owner. I'm like, oh, this is my favorite part of the job, getting to talk to you in the car and taking you home and doing stuff like that. And we've cultivated a lot of relationships over the years just by me spending time with people like that in a more relaxed setting. And they'll come in and they'll ask for me or whatever, and I'll guide them through something. And then I'll say, these two guys here, they can take care of it for you. And if they can't, then I will. But you got to build that foundation, and it's a trust thing or whatever. But
right.
I'm glad you asked that because I love doing it. So
that's awesome. And it is a great opportunity for you to build that trust. And I kind of want to make a quick comment. It's less about your age and more about the age of your sons as far as the transition time period. Because based on our retirement goals and whatnot, I'm probably going to work until about 127. But in all seriousness, I'm actually excited about this birthday. I've already ordered the cake because when my son was in kindergarten, when he finally went to school, his bus number was 51. And he told me, as kids do, Dad, I can't wait till you're 51 because then you'll be the same age as my bus number. And so I'm getting a school bus cake this year, and we're going to have fun with the memories on that one. But anyway, in all seriousness, I love the fact that you're recognizing that you are, I think Jeremy's right, you got a great transition plan, but I do think it's more about their age and the stage that they're in. Because otherwise, if you just ran the things the way that you wanted and didn't give them any kind of operational control or management growth or whatnot, they'd be sitting at 40 years old saying, what am I doing? And that could just create other frustration for you or for them.
And part of it is I went through that with my father, and that was a hard thing to get through. And I'm sure they'll tell me I'm stubborn and I don't listen, but truth is I do listen, maybe not as much, but I want their opinion. I have things that I want to do, and I'm bringing them along now. My biggest goal is to be able to leave every, whatever day it is of the week. I'd like to join a golf league in the summer and be able to slip away for one day, an afternoon, and say, it's okay, and not have to think about it and not worry about it. And that's really my transition thing, is to be able to do that. I do. And there's times where I want to leave. I have customers that ask me to come with them, and I've turned them down, and the boys are finally like, "Bro, you got to go do it." I said, "I'm going to do it." And I have to feel good about doing it. And that's giving them the responsibility to be able to do this stuff. So
what's your handicap?
I'm right around 15 right now.
Okay. All right. You're a better golfer than I am, but I still love it. I still love being out there and enjoying it. And actually, I didn't go out at all last year. Interestingly enough, you're actually only about an hour maybe from me. So why don't you and I put that on the calendar for another time, all right? And Jeremy, you mentioned it's only a couple hour plane flight. Do you golf? You want to come up and join us?
I enjoy the beer cart.
Okay. All right. Very good. But back to that trust building, that piece. Jeremy, do you have any opportunity to interact with the customers directly, or is it all your service advisors developing that bond all the time? And what is your capacity when you're doing that? Are you being tagged like a tag team to be brought in when it's a bad situation? When are you interacting with the?
It's all of the above. I'll greet people. I have a lot of longtime customers who, no matter where I am, they'll pop their head in and we'll talk for a minute. I always try to do my best to greet new customers. All of my vintage cars, myself and my service advisor that handles the vintage cars, we go over and make introductions, go over the car with the customer, make them feel comfortable. And yes, I do get brought in when there's an issue.
No? You don't like that challenge?
I'd like to avoid confrontation by making sure there's no issue.
Kind of like doing maintenance to a car as opposed to having to do the repair. And with that in mind, roughly when in this industry did the manufacturers start bragging about these large service intervals? And when did you first notice that was a challenge that you had to dial back?
I first started seeing this, like I said before, we were primarily a Honda, Acura, Toyota, Lexus shop. So 2002, 2003 is when Honda and Toyota shifted over from a scheduled maintenance structure to a condition-based maintenance structure with dash indicators telling the customers, oh, you have 50% oil life, 20% oil life, or you have a letter number sequence that specifies when you're due for your filters or your fluids or whatnot. And they have spent the past or the next 10, 15 years slowly converting the mindset of the public into thinking there's all these magic sensors in my car that read all the conditions of my fluids and they tell me when it actually needs to be done. Yeah. And the customers don't understand that it's all a mathematical calculation based on runtime and distance. And I had heard that they started this because buyers of new cars were complaining at the dollar amount for maintenance listed on the window sticker. They had figured that if we could make that dollar amount as close to zero as possible, they could sell more cars.
Sure.
It's implying to the customer that the car doesn't need maintenance. Well, if that's 100% true,
it's a logical story, but makes sense. Mitch, how about you? When did you start seeing the pushback from the customer as far as how often they needed to come in?
I'd say probably where we really noticed a transition. I can agree with Jeremy on that, where we saw it, but I think it really got prevalent and brought to the forefront the mid 2000s. We started seeing stuff happen for us anyway. You start having those customers that are buying cars, they're coming out of warranty, and maybe they're coming to your shop now, and we're recommending stuff based on mileage or condition or whatever it is, or just a simple oil change. You're pulling out somebody's dipstick and there's no oil on it. I'm supposed to be good for 7,500 miles. And you come find out that Chrysler has an allowable oil consumption of 750 miles, 1 quart per every 750 miles.
Oh, wow.
And it's a 5 quart system. You do the math, there's no oil. I can remember that being one of the first ones that we really ran into, that it was, I don't want to say confrontational, and that was at Chrysler Pacifica. And where we had to really change our mindset and start saying, what are we going to do to make the customer understand that this really isn't, I want to call it a lie, but isn't going to, the math doesn't work.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
So I have a similar story to Mitch. And it was in a Subaru, 7,500 mile change interval with 1 quart per every 1,000 usage is acceptable, 4.5 quart capacity. The customer comes in for an oil change. There's nothing in the car. And I called the local dealer going, what in the world are you telling these people? Because you're already telling them that they don't have to change their oil, but you're not educating them that they have to check their oil. Because yes, it is true today that oil does not break down and yes, can go 10,000 miles without degradation, but it doesn't mean the car didn't burn it. And no one's checking.
I'm sorry. Did you actually call the dealer and ask that question? Because I want a recording of that conversation. It's a fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
How did it go?
You should have seen me when I called the Hyundai Kia about the engine lockup issue that I saw 3 years before they issued the recall.
Okay.
So
tell me the story.
Heated conversation. This was probably 14 or 15. And we started seeing a string of Optimas and Sonatas, and they get 60,000 miles on them. And the engines were locked up tighter than drum. And after about the third one, I called down to the dealer and I said, guys, I'm seeing a string of these things. What are you seeing? And immediately, without hesitation, no, we haven't seen any of this at all. And then I started getting more. And I'm like, I'm talking to the customer and I said, look, you need to call the dealer and you need to see what they're going to do for you. So then about that time, they issued a recall for the warranty on the motors. And then I got seeing a rash of them being denied because Hyundai said, you don't have records showing that you've had your oil change every 3,850 miles with an OE oil filter. So then they started running away from the warranties on them. So not to talk bad about a manufacturer, but I tell all my customers, I said, when you're looking for a new car, it doesn't matter what it is. They all have problems, but look at the manufacturer that takes care of you.
Hey, let me cut in real quick. Are you wondering what your next marketing step is? Well, you don't have to figure it out on your own. The entire premise of this show is that we're trying to help repair shop owners. And in that same spirit of helping first, I will give you your next actionable step that's going to boost sales and boost that car count in your shop. To find out more, go to aashopmarketing.com/help or click in the link in the show notes below. Now, back to the episode. That's interesting. You said that they were denying it because it was 3,800 miles that they weren't getting serviced?
Yeah, Hyundai's got this weird 3,850 mile oil change interval.
But does that match up with their owner's manual as far as how often?
To be perfectly honest, I'd have to go back and reference it.
Okay.
Mitch seems like he's got some information.
I believe it does. So we were part of that whole thing. I needed a car for my wife. She had that commute for a couple of years. So I got a 13 Sonata, had 21,000 miles. I can still see the whole thing playing out. And she's driving it back and forth to work. And I leave it when we go on vacation. And I said to the guys, just have it ready for when we come back. And so I come back and they're like, hey, we feel it's making noise. And so I said, what are you talking about? And so we go over it and 54,000 miles at that point. And they tell me what's going on. And I said, okay, take it to Hyundai dealer in Lancaster County. And they're going to do the decibel test on it, make sure everything's okay. They say everything's okay. So I come back with it and I have to pick up Hyundai parts maybe 2 days from then. So I said, I'm taking the Hyundai and I'm going to go to the other dealer, which is what's the next county over. And I know the guys at the counter in there. And I said, would you listen to this thing? And they said, sure. So I hang out for a little bit. He comes in and he says, we're going to put a new engine in there. And I said, what? New engine? And he's, it failed the decibel test and it does this, that. And I'm like, are you sure? And he said, yep, going to take care of it. So I left the car there and I got 2 Hyundais with new engines through that whole process. Both of them about 55,000 miles is when it happened. And by then, so that would have been in like 16, 17, that lawsuit or whatever recall thing had come out, and they were putting motors in those things left and right.
Interesting. All right. Back to this, the oil down and how long it lasts. Jeremy, do you use liquid moly at all?
I used Total for years. Have used liquid moly. I only do that really the German cars.
Okay.
Yeah, it's customer base.
Are you using BG products for Mitch or Jeremy? Are you guys using those products as well?
Yes, we use those exclusively.
Okay. All right.
Our oil we run mostly Kendall GT Max products. We run some Chevron products for our Euro cars that we get in. Anything, it's got to meet the specs, of course, but I currently do not have a program like BG or Valvoline or any of those other things that I work with.
Okay. So part of the reason I'm asking is I'm just thinking about back to the service intervals. They have the specifications for what the oil needs to be. And did you ever have any kind of pushback on they weren't putting in the right kind of oil? And that's on the repair shop side or no? Okay.
No, not at all. And actually, I've been in scenarios where customers want to put in a thicker oil. And Toyota has been very strict on the weight of oil that you can put in their vehicles. They had a 0.16, they've had that for a couple of years, and now they're at a 0.8. So with tolerances that tight in the motor, if you put in a 530, you're probably going to brick the motor.
So talk to me about having to have the conversations, any kind of memorable conversations with the customer who came in and was so set on, no, it said 10,000 miles. I don't know why I needed it done sooner. Before there was a bad repair.
Mitch?
Who wants to go first and share the story?
Rock, paper, scissors.
There you go.
So we've had, like I said, we get long-standing customers. And I had a customer with a Honda CRV. And we kept telling them, okay, if you want to use synthetic blend, then 3,000 miles. But if you do synthetic 5,000 miles, please do not exceed that. Come in regularly. And they're like, no, we wait until it says 10% left on the oil indicator light. So they did that. And at 85,000 miles, they stretched the timing chain, tensioner, and the variable cam gear. So that was an $1,800 repair. And if they would have just done their oil changes when I asked them to, one, they wouldn't have needed repair, and they still would not have spent $1,800 in additional oil changes.
Okay. Are they still your customer or are they pissed off at you?
No, they're fine.
Okay. How about you, Mitch? You got a story for me? I'm going to change the variables of the story in a moment, but Mitch, you go first.
Yeah, same thing. Basically, Chevy Equinox, they're running the variable valve timing on those. The clean oil is important. Wound up having to do a timing thing on that because of the extended oil change intervals. It just breaks down, it gets sludgy, and it affects them. I told my customers this. So blends are 3,000, full synthetics 5. So basically what it comes down to, if you take the average miles driven per year for our customers anyway, it's one extra oil change a year, $85 or whatever it comes down to, and it's peace of mind. And I know I can't go out and say, I haven't published an article on it or whatever, but if you've been in the industry, you take that one extra oil change, that gets you through. You have clean oil, you have your engines full of oil, and you avoid probably 95% of the time, you're going to avoid catastrophic failure. I feel it's as simple as that. Now, whether you can get people to always buy into it or not, but I have all our customers we're on blend, they're on 3. If we're on synthetic, they're on 5. And when we made that decision to go to that, we had a pushback initially, but now they're pretty faithful about it.
With the initial pushback, what was that like?
What was the spending of the money?
Just the $85.
Yeah. And a lot of it is that Jeremy said they're relying on the monitor to tell them that, but we're speculating that thing's working accurately. So for me, I'm a miles driven guy, or at least once a year or every 6 months or whatever it is, but never extended intervals like that. It was just the initial pushback. And us, it's like learning a new topic. We need to be educated. So we have to do the same thing and educate our customers to do what's best for them.
And you're talking about education. A lot of times what I do when I have a customer comes in and they want to talk about maintenance, hopefully I get them early enough where the car's only got 10,000, 15,000 miles on it. But one of the first things I asked them is, how long do you want to keep the car? If you're a typical owner or whatever that wants to keep it for 3 years, they dump them for 100,000, then by all means, follow the bare minimum maintenance schedule because it will last that long. But I have a big portion of my customers that keep cars for 10 or 15 years. And I'll flat out tell them, says, don't listen to the maintenance schedule. Don't listen to the dash. Do maintenance every 5,000 miles. You're taking care of stuff. And I know the manufacturer is going to tell you that it's lifetime transmission fluid. And I've stood there in front of BMW and I said, yes, life of the transmission. You got to, and I try to educate my customers that every 20,000 miles, let's change that fluid out, especially if you're going to try to keep this car for 200,000-300,000 miles.
Yeah, because eventually, if you don't do that, then once you reach 180,000 miles, it becomes an issue as far as that transmission fluid.
Sure. And if you're trying to change it after 60, you'll create a problem. If not, then they're stuck.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit on the other side of the equation. I actually don't usually drive a car with fewer than 100,000 miles because I don't like to spend a ton of money on cars, but I spend a little bit on maintenance, of course. But I happen to know that, and I think, Jeremy, I mentioned this to you before, that with Jeeps, the joke is I don't need no oil change anymore. It just sprays out on the road as I go, and I just keep filling it back up.
They work.
What's that?
That's how you know they still work. They stop leaking oil.
Yeah, it's like that. And the Jeep that I have now is actually only about 180,000 miles. I figure it's got another 30 or 40 before the transmission falls apart on me. But anyway, that was not in the service manual or the manufacturer's. This will fall apart after 200,000 miles. But that's been consistent with all of my Jeep ownerships. When it comes to, tell me stories about customers who, so you talked to me about a maintenance issue. Did you have any yelling matches with customers who were just headstrong about, the dealer told me this, and you actually had to argue with them? Or at that point, you just said, that's not correct, and you just backed away?
I'm not going to get in a fight with a customer about that. At the end of the day, it is their vehicle. And if they want to follow what the manufacturer says because they think that's gospel, then I'll do what's required.
Okay. But I do think there's a level of trust that's being built. We talked about this. We keep using that word trust a couple of times. It's quintessential for shops to develop that kind of trust. So what are we doing to build that trust beyond just having the interval conversation? Mitch, you're driving people around, but Jeremy, what are you doing to build that trust with those customers so that when you make a statement that's different from what they've heard elsewhere, they believe you over where they heard it elsewhere?
It takes a long time to build that level of trust. To be honest, I think we could probably do a better job on the initial meet and greet of a new customer, and I'm still working on that. But a lot of times we build trust by, one, learning about our customers, their families, their backgrounds. And when we do present a repair order to them, we will break it up into what needs to be done now, what is maintenance that you should do in X amount of time, and what to look forward to in the next 12 to 18 months that we're starting to see is wearing. So going to them and not dumping everything on them at one time, which I know violates the 300 rule, but it helps to build trust.
What about you, Mitch?
So if we have a new customer, we always want to cultivate that relationship at the counter, find out their goals, or really maybe it's the issue that brought them in. But we will go, if it's a new car to us, and we do it every time with our other customers, just so we have record of it, is we'll do that digital video inspection top to bottom, and we'll get fluid samples, and we want to see what's going on. And then we as a shop have come up with our own program, mileage and whatnot, that we'll recommend it. And we'll tell them why, or we'll show them what we're seeing. Maybe you can't do it all today. Okay, I get that. But let's hit the most important one, or let's knock a couple of these off, and then the next time, let's knock a couple other ones off. And then try and get you back on that schedule so that everything is maintained and taken care of. The last thing you want is to have a catastrophic breakdown. And one of the things I've noticed over the years since we've gone back to this maintenance program we have, I talked to the boys about it. Think about how many of our regular customer vehicles have come back on a tow truck or have been towed in from a breakdown. I would bet it's less than 0.5%. We have a vehicle that's coming in on a hook or a flatbed. it's almost always a first-time customer. Something blew out, something broke, something didn't change this, engine locked up, whatever. And it's typically nothing that we've seen. We have tons of customers that have gotten big miles on their vehicles by changing these intervals and doing that stuff for them. It's way cheaper than buying a new car. If you want to buy a new car and spend money on a new car, hey, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you from doing it. But we have people that tell me their goal from working here that, hey, they're 300,000 mile people. You might get 300,000 miles out of this car. Then I'm going to get another car. I'm going to do the same thing. And they know what it takes to get there.
Well, and I've even considered that for my Jeep, right? Is that I know that if I replace the transmission, I might actually get another 50 or 60,000 miles out of it. But because it hadn't been maintained all along, there's no hope it's going much beyond 200.
I have friends that have
I wasn't the first owner. I didn't own it until closer to 100,000 miles. So I was already behind the 8 ball as far as that goes.
I have friends that have a Honda Acura. They started as a Honda Acura aftermarket specialist shop. They have taken on other brands as well, but they have a wall in there, and there's just, you walk to the front door and there's a wall. They'll say Brad Hurlock, he's got 200,000. And then there's 300,000. And they'll say Jeremy Bucy, here's 400,000. There's Mitch Fasnacht, here's 500,000. And they showcase those names off of those people that have those vehicles. And that comes from maintenance and taking care of your vehicle.
We had a 1992 Honda Accord, original engine, 998,000 miles.
What?
Yes, 998,000 miles. It still ran. It was great. I don't want to drive it. Suspension was completely shot, and the chassis about stressed out to the point that it's floppy spring, but it still ran, and they still drove it.
How long ago was that?
Probably about 8 years ago, somewhere around there.
Okay. And what year was the car again?
92, Honda Accord, 4-door.
Okay.
You asked me earlier if I ever had gotten an argument about maintenance with a customer. I've gotten in one. So it was a 1993 Acura NSX. And I'd go out on a limb and tell you that maybe 10% of the first generation NSXs in this country have actually had regular maintenance. Because we'll get them in and people will be like, I want to buy this car. It's got 20,000 miles on it. And I'll look at them dead in the face and says, I'll guarantee you this thing's never had a timing belt. So what do you mean? It doesn't need one. It's only got 20,000 miles on it. No one follows the time-based maintenance. And let me tell you, rubber's not going to last 30 years. And timing belt on that sex is quite expensive, but that's beside the point.
Interesting.
That one's always been a struggle, even before condition-based maintenance, is people following time-based maintenance. The people that don't drive a lot, they're starting to understand they need to change their oil at least once a year, but certain things wear out and dry rot, and it's a hard sell for them.
That's interesting.
It's no different. Your tires will dry rot sitting in your garage or outside your driveway or whatever. Things just deteriorate.
And is that time 1 year or is that time 6 months, 30 days? How fast is that deterioration? And it probably also matters on the temperature, whether or not it's garage kept and those other factors. Yeah. But what do you think? 1 year, the idea of only doing an oil change once a year is actually mind-boggling to me. That would just be not enough.
I'm talking about people who drive less than 5,000 miles a year. Like I've got 3 vehicles that I only change oil in once a year because they get driven maybe 500 miles a year.
And they're garage kept. Okay. So they have a good environment and you don't have to deal with 0-degree weather down there in Georgia. It's really an issue.
South.
What was that?
I said I would run further south if I had to deal with 0-degree weather.
Alan Cox has now moved to the Keys, the Florida Keys. We're hoping that we can transfer the customers with us. Okay. Yeah, I was talking to a shop in Minnesota was it yesterday or the day before? They're currently at -15. Yeah, that's probably too cold for me.
Yeah, we get an inch of snow on the ground down here. The entire town shuts down and no one comes to work.
Yeah. It happens, I would imagine. But anyway, that's a whole other topic that we could go into for a while because my attitude is we've got plows, we got salt trucks, just get on with it.
We have a few more salt trucks.
Okay. Why?
What was that? 2011, 2012, when we had a massive snow and ice storm coming real quick and people were stranded for 3 days in their cars.
Okay. And so that salt truck now is sitting for 5 years. How often does it get serviced?
Oh, they'll run it if it rains just so they can use up the money.
Okay. All right. We don't have to worry about the miles on that. Okay. All right. So how else are we building? So we're doing, Mitch, you're using the DVIs. You're also having at length conversations with new customers to develop a plan. Is there like a written plan where they actually say, I want to drive this for 300,000 miles, or look at this, he's holding it up?
So we put this together. This is what me and my guys from years of experience just seeing, and Jeremy could tell you this too. He knows you learn by doing, or you see it every day, and then you can come up with a plan. So we put our plan on paper, and my guys all have this hanging at their toolbox. I hire somebody new, they get one of these. The advisors have these things, and this is what we work on. It's time and miles on here for every operation you come up with, every fluid service, shocks, struts, tires, batteries, whatever. Ultimately, it comes back into the hands of the customer. They're the ones that have the purse strings, and they can decide it or whatever it is. And sometimes I talk to them and say, people say, whatever Mitch thinks, or whatever it is, because I've been here for so long. I'm sure Jeremy has the same thing. All us guys who've been in the industry a long time, you want them to feel good about it, and you want them to feel the value or whatever you're presenting them. But I fully believe in that. If my mom comes in and she's a first-time customer, I'm putting her on that program, that type of thing. Or say, this is what I would do for my mom. My wife's car, doing the same thing. I truly believe in it.
Do you share that with the customers as well?
I do. Yep.
Okay. Do you customize it based on their goals for their vehicle, whether they have a 180,000 miles or whether they have a 20,000 mile vehicle and they're...
Yeah. And that's where you have to look and say, when it comes back to the DVI and we start really digging into something and saying, all right, some things are past the point of no return already. Like maybe your CVT transmission fluid, don't do it because you're going to open up a can of worms. It's going to fail, but I don't want to be the guy that kills it for you. But some coolant services or brake fluid exchanges, things like that, we can get that stuff taken care of. You're still driving, you got your brakes. Let's look at your tires. Pennsylvania has state inspection. It's probably one of the most stringent things in the country. And I'm thankful for that. But a tire fails or passes inspection up to 230 seconds. But we all know there's virtually no tread left at that point. It's not doing its job. It's over.
So what's the point of having that particular regulation if it's actually already failing?
Well, one of the things that if you go to like our state inspection meetings and it comes up every year that they want to change it. Could it be 430 seconds? Probably. That's where we start recommending them so that you
get the wear bar.
Yeah, you get to the wear bar and tires by that time they're hard or they're starting to crack. There's things I think in the program that are good and there's things I think that are lacking. I would love the 430 seconds because you don't have when there's no tread, you increase your stopping distance. You don't have any capability of displacing water or snow when you're driving. There's just a lot of things that go with it. That comes down to informing your customer, educating them on what they're seeing. If they don't know, half of them don't know because nobody ever told them anything.
Right. It's like teaching the children in school how to do their taxes. It never happens. And the first time they're reliant on TurboTax, whatever. There are times when some people just have a block, right? They don't understand the mechanical world at all. You try to start explaining it and you can just see their eyes gloss over. And there's all different varying degrees or spectrum of that. I guess what I'm trying to say is how technical, what I'm trying to ask actually is how technical are you getting when you're trying to tell them about more service intervals or smaller service intervals based on what the dealer was saying. And here is why. Are you actually getting into the details of what's going to fail and what it means to them? I had a friend of mine who used to be my mechanic, and every time he tried to explain to me the details of how the engine was working, and it got past where I cared. I guess what I'm saying is, I imagine you've got a lot of customers that don't want to hear those details. How are you communicating with them?
My big one is transmission fluid. I do explain to them the technical thing of why have they gone to these lifetime transmission fluid changes, what happens inside of it. As the valve bodies wear, the fluid viscosity goes up, so therefore it maintains the same pressure characteristics for shifting. But at the point 100,000, 120,000, you have so much metal in there that everything's become so scarred up that it fails. Versus if you change your fluid on an interval that I specify, then that extends that time period longer. Or if I'm trying to tell somebody, you need to change your oil more often, I usually go from the perspective of an engine's not perfectly sealed. So you have contaminants that get past the pistons into the oil. So changing your oil is another form of filtration. So getting that old oil out on a regular basis helps maintain the cleanliness of the inside of the engine.
Okay. All right. And that goes over well, that you didn't get too technical. You
Yeah,
kept it
they
pretty simple.
seem to understand that, especially when you start talking about the filtration, that keeping contaminants out. They all understand that.
Okay.
But don't
All
get
right. Okay. All right.
I think that some of it comes back down to the tech write-up. When we have that in, I don't want them to dumb it down, but I want them to write it so that if I read it or I hold up an RO or however you're doing it, that thing needs to be fairly understandable without a lot of explanation. Now, we can explain a lot of things and do that, but one of my favorite things is, even if it's not a fluid-driven thing, say it's a belt, I will take a customer into the shop and just show them the drive belt if I can do it. And I'll say, look, that's going to run your water pump, that runs your power steering, that runs this. If that thing breaks, you have none of those. And so sometimes it's not to scare them, but you physically have to show them how important this is. Like, one belt drives the whole system. Then they're like, oh, nobody ever told me that, or I didn't know that. It's just a learning thing. If I don't know something and I go to a doctor's office and they use all these big words and they try to explain something to me, and I left there and I feel frustrated or ticked off that I don't understand what's going on, I certainly don't want my people to feel that way. I want them to leave here feeling confident that I'm doing the right thing for them. And if that means the show and tell, or showing them a sample, this is your sample, it's dirty, this is what clean fluid looks like, I can do all that stuff. And I think once you do that stuff and you get that in their head and they understand and you get that level of trust, then you can get them on this program and they fully understand what's going on.
And the next time you do that explanation, you don't have to include the customer in it. You can just include your mechanic and then maybe the customer kind of on the side. Take a video, take out your phone, and your digital marketing person is going to be excited to be able to get that 15-second or 20-second video, because they're going to be able to make all sorts of hay with that video. And they're going to make sure that it gets put in front of your existing customer base, because then you're actually pre-building that trust before they even have to be brought into the shop to show them what they're looking at. So just a quick marketing tip for you on that. You don't need to worry about making it super doctored or professional. Just simple iPhone or Galaxy, just hold it up and record it and not even worry about the lighting or anything like that. It's more about what's going on. This is the kind of conversation we have with our customers. And I think that would go a long way at also building future trust with other ones as well. So just a side point. You want to talk about ethanol, Jeremy? Is that something you were itching to do? Go ahead.
But Mitch said that he doesn't use a lot of like BG products or things like that. And one of the things that we have been seeing for a while, especially since the release of GDI motors, is a lot of carbon buildup. A lot of carbon buildup on the injectors, a lot of carbon buildup in the combustion chamber. There's a lot of manufacturers who use low tension piston rings, and they have smaller oiling holes in the piston. So once those things get carboned up, these things are burning oil left and right. So there's a couple of different products that BG offers that helps to clean those things. They're most effective when used on a regular basis, but sometimes you can get them to where they'll burn less oil in between oil changes by using their EPR product.
Okay.
But a lot of that is directly related to ethanol in the fuel, because you're basically pumping sugar into the tank.
Interesting.
And we don't need to get into the corn lobby.
I'm actually trying not to go
I know
there,
you are.
but that's exactly where, we could talk about make America healthy again, or make the auto industry, cars healthy again. I don't know. But okay, we've touched on some examples of nightmare examples. We've touched on how we're approaching the building of the trust beforehand and sometimes afterwards when they don't listen. And we've talked about, we talked a little bit about the dealers and which ones, we only touched on two different ones, I think, but they're all culprits, aren't they? Aren't they all trying to push larger intervals?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the theory is, anecdotal as it might be, is that they're just trying to make it look like there's no maintenance needed, so it's an easier sell of the vehicle in the first place. What else did we cover in regards to the service intervals? I want to say that we also covered some horror stories on when people didn't listen. Is there any other culprits in this? Is it just the manufacturers of the cars, or are the companies that are selling the oil also bragging about larger intervals and larger lifetimes?
I remember, I haven't seen this commercial in a while, but Mobil had a commercial about an oil that is a one-time change a year, had no mileage limit on it. And I have not seen that commercial in a while, or that product on a shelf. So,
do you remember the name of the particular?
It was called Mobil One Lifetime, but we'll have to do some Googling to verify. But it scared me, because you got people out there that, okay, I'll spend $100 on this oil, pull it and pour it in my car, and never change the oil.
Okay. Mobil One high mileage 5W30. According to Google's initial response, it says that it's currently guaranteeing up to 15,000 miles between oil changes. Seems extremely high.
Yeah. And all they're guaranteeing is that the oil itself will not break down. They're not guaranteeing that it won't be burnt or consumed.
Burned, consumed, or other issues that need to be tended to. That's the other thing, is the oil is not the only thing in the maintenance of the car.
Overall, look at what's changed since the 90s. The 90s vehicles, for the most part, they had a regular maintenance schedule, and these cars lasted and lasted. I still have customers with Toyotas and Hondas from the 80s and 90s that still drive them today. But since then, you've had CAFE standards change, mandated by the government. You've had crash test ratings change, mandated by the government. So cars now have to survive an impact with a dump truck and get 60 miles to the gallon. And anybody that's taken a high school physics class can know that those two things are not mutually exclusive.
That's interesting.
You can technically build a car today to do 100 miles per gallon, but it's going to weigh 1,000 pounds, and you're probably going to die in an impact with it.
Right.
I think the biggest thing in the new car market is the manufacturer's attraction, or building something to attract people with the technology. They're not talking about horsepower hardly. Years ago, a truck, you'd sell a commercial for a truck. This truck does whatever horsepower. You can cover this, you can do that. I'm not saying you don't see a little bit of that, but it's all about the technology. If you look, it's the interior package, it's the OnStar, it's the message things, it does this, it does that. They take all the focus away of anything else and drive you towards that. And for me, that's my least favorite package or part of the whole automobile industry. Buttons and whatever on the dash. And
the comfort features.
The comfort features. For me,
that's about to change. Europe passed a law stating that it's taking 40 some odd seconds on average for a driver to interact with the touchscreen infotainment systems. So they're mandating actual buttons again.
Oh.
You're going to see another shift in that in the next few years.
You're going to go back to smaller screens, or you're going to be forced to take them out, replace them with buttons. Interesting. Okay, so 40 seconds. I want to push back on that. Average of 40 seconds. So all statistics are potentially lies.
Oh, of course.
It's a matter of sample audience and those types of things that they're pulling in. You put me in front of that screen and you put my son in front of that screen, and he's potentially going to beat me to the punch. That's the age-old story. So that 40 seconds, what was the age demographic of the people actually being surveyed in that? Yeah, but it's true. You probably shouldn't have a TV on your dash, because that is a distraction in general, right? That's just like you're supposed to be, the screen is the actual windshield. There's your motion picture.
The only anecdotal evidence I have in that is BMW. BMW in the early 2000s released the iDrive. So it was a knob in the middle with the preset buttons in the front. And they kept that rough same design for a long time. So if you were a long-standing BMW customer, you could just get in any of the newer cars, and your hand automatically knew everything it needed to do. And I've owned several of them, and it used to always irritate me, because when I'd go get into an Audi or whatever, the knob rotation was backwards. So it would drive me nuts, because my hand was doing what it was programmed to do, but the system was responding differently.
And sometimes it's just a matter of, again, back to that 40 seconds.
Yeah.
How long had they owned that car at the point where it was still 40 seconds? Because because of these comfort features that Mitch brought up, like you do need to spend some time before you actually put it on the road, learning the car and learning all the details, because you don't have time to make the change. You can't be trying to figure out how to make the change when you're doing it 40 miles an hour. It needs to be prior to. So
part of the reason you can't use your map, or you can't punch in your direction while you're driving. If you've noticed that you got to pull over, you got to stop, or whatever it is.
That drives me nuts.
Yeah. The thing that bothers me the most about it is I'll have my wife will be with me and she can't even push it in because we're moving. But I get it as a safety feature. But one of the things, I didn't mean to switch topics on you there, Brett, but just say a senior citizen person that gets a new car, and I can attest to this because my parents are in their 80s.
Right.
They get a new car that has all these features in, and they inadvertently hit a button and it changes the whole dash, or it changes whatever, and they hate it. And we're driving more and more towards features, and they don't know how to switch them back. And when you talk about, you really need to take your time and have somebody spend an hours maybe, and show you how to switch these buttons and do this and do that. And I've had more than one senior person come to me and say, I hit a button on the dash or something inadvertently and it changed everything. I hate this. And they just want to drive.
Yes.
To me, that's what the manufacturers are driving about. They took away the maintenance features and they did that. And they're trying to make everybody focus on the interior features, the comfort things. And that's where they're driving. And you see it in the commercials on TV.
And I see it in my real life. Like I said, I'm a Jeep Grand Cherokee person. I've been driving them for not the same one, obviously, but replacing them as I go over the last 20 plus years. And the one I currently have is absolutely a car in the shape of a Jeep Grand Cherokee. I can feel it on the road. I can feel it when I take it off the driveway and onto the field. I can feel it. It's not meant to be trying to pull something or trying to be. I've put thousands of pounds of rocks in the back of my Jeep, previous ones, not the current one. And I wouldn't even try that with the current one because there's no way it would actually be able to handle it. But the ones from the late 90s and the early 2000s still were a little bit of beasts. Anyway, I don't even know how much snow mine could currently handle, but I used to drive through as much snow as I possibly could. More than 1 inch, Jeremy, like 15 to 20 inches was just fun. But I don't know if I can pull it off in the current one. All right, we've been talking for quite a bit now, and I really appreciate both of you and your time for joining us. If you have other thoughts on how to build trust with your customer that you didn't share today, feel free to jump out to that Facebook group that I told you about and just add another thought to you. As well as those who are listening, feel free to jump out to that Facebook group. And if you're not already a member, I'll approve you. I'll make sure that you get in, as long as you're a shop owner, or even actually if you're a top manager, I'll still let you in, and then you can be a part of that conversation. So we can continue this inside that group instead of just staying on the chat line here. And I don't know, again, thanks. Any last thoughts before we sum up? Any recommendations for someone who's trying to figure out how to unwind the dealership's 10,000 mile myth?
I would just say, for me, it would be just, hey, come talk to me personally about it, or talk to my guys, and we can guide you through it.
Yeah.
And what's in the whys. And then it's a much easier conversation to have in person.
Yeah. And it really is just about taking the time with the customer and just slow walking them through the logic.
Yeah.
You want to add to that, Jeremy?
It still comes down to customer relations, developing that trust level with them. You got a customer that's been coming to you for years and you're having this conversation, they'll be more apt to trust you than the very first guy that's coming in for the first time.
And yes. And we had an episode about that as well. We talked about different CRMs that people are using, different shops are using. And I've been asked to do that again. I plan on doing it in the near future, where we bring on 3 other CRMs that people are using and walk through how they're using it and what they're using it for and how they're applying it. Stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, again, it's the Garage Grid Facebook page. You can find us through the aashopmarketing.com website or through the AA Shop Marketing's Facebook page. And thanks for listening. Have a great day.